What if you went to sleep tonight and woke up to find your country no longer belonged to you? No war declared, no warning given, just darkness, and then the sound of boots on the roof. That is exactly what happened in Caracas, Venezuela, on the night of January 3rd, 2026. A sitting president in his own bedroom was taken away by foreign soldiers. No courtroom, no trial, no warning, just gone. And the man watching it happen live on a screen, thousands of miles away, was smiling. Today I am going to tell you the full story. How did it come to this? Why did two countries that were once close trading partners end up here? Is this really about drugs and democracy? Or is it about something far older, far greedier, and far more dangerous? Stick with me, because this story goes back over 100 years. And once you understand it, you will never look at the news the same way again. It is 1:30 in the morning. The Caribbean Sea is pitch black. But it is not quiet. Spread across the water, barely visible, sit rows of American naval vessels. On their decks, engines are already running, fighter jets are fueled, armed drones are spinning up, and soldiers, highly trained, highly specialized soldiers, are strapped in and waiting. These soldiers had trained for this moment for months, not in some far-off war zone, but in a replica, a full-size exact copy of a building in Caracas, Venezuela, built secretly at a military base in Kentucky. They had walked those hallways hundreds of times. They knew every door, every corner, every second of the plan. Back in Caracas, the city has no idea what is coming. People are sleeping. Restaurants are closed. Street dogs are wandering quiet roads. Normal. At exactly 2 a.m., the lights go out. Not one street, not one neighborhood, the entire city. All at once, black. This was not a power cut from bad wiring. This was a cyber attack, surgical, coordinated, and months in the planning. The U.S. Cyber Command and the NSA hit Venezuela's national power grid at the exact same moment as the air defense radars went offline. The radar screens, the ones meant to detect exactly this kind of intrusion, went dead. Now the sky over Caracas was open, and 150 aircraft moved in. EA-18G Growler jets jammed every remaining communication. Surveillance planes circled high above, feeding live video back to screens in Florida. And then the helicopters descended. Delta Force soldiers fast-roped onto the roof of Fuerte Tiuna, Venezuela's most heavily defended military compound, right in the heart of the capital. The guards heard the helicopters. They looked up. They opened fire. But it was already too late. The soldiers were already inside. President Nicolás Maduro woke up to the sound of explosions. He grabbed his wife, and they ran. They ran for the safe room. They almost made it. The door was still open when the soldiers arrived. The president of Venezuela and his wife were handcuffed and taken out of the building they thought would protect them forever. At Mar-a-Lago, Palm Beach, Florida, Donald Trump watched the whole thing on a live feed. When he saw the confirmation, Maduro is in custody, he turned to the people in the room, and he smiled. The next morning, Trump went on television. He told the world, Venezuela is now under American oversight. The oil infrastructure will be restructured. Democracy will be restored. And until that happens, Venezuela will run on America's terms. The world went silent. Then it exploded. To understand why this happened, we have to go back. Way back. Not to last year, not to the 1990s, back to 1498. That is when Christopher Columbus first landed on Venezuelan soil. He looked around at the rivers, the forests, the birds, and wrote in his journal that he thought he had found paradise. The Spanish did not see paradise. They saw real estate. Within a few decades, Venezuela was a Spanish colony, and it stayed that way for 3 centuries. Then came one of the most remarkable men in South American history, a general named Simón Bolívar. If you have never heard of him, imagine George Washington, but for an entire continent. Bolívar did not just liberate Venezuela. He drove the Spanish out of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia. He dreamed of a United States of South America. Venezuela officially declared independence in 1811, but real freedom came by 1821 after years of brutal war. Bolívar's dream of a united federation called Gran Colombia lasted only a few years. By 1830, the same year Bolívar died, it had fallen apart. Venezuela became its own nation, and then the next 80 years were a mess. One military dictator after another, coups, civil wars, poverty. By the late 1800s, Venezuela had borrowed so much money from European banks that those countries sent warships to blockade its ports. America stepped in, not out of kindness, out of strategy. The Monroe Doctrine said, "This is our backyard, no European interference." America pushed the ships away, and quietly, America became the new power behind the scenes in Latin America. In 1908, a man named Juan Vicente Gómez took power in Venezuela. He was a dictator, no question about that, but he was also clever. By then, geologists were whispering that something extraordinary lay beneath Venezuelan soil. Gómez made a deal. He opened the country to American and British oil companies. "You dig," he said, "you pay me, and we will all get rich." In 1914, the first commercial oil well started producing, and by the 1920s, Venezuela was sitting on one of the largest oil deposits ever found. The money started pouring in. During World War II, Venezuela supplied the Allied powers with a massive share of their fuel. After the war, by 1950, Venezuela was the 4th richest country on the planet. Caracas was transformed. Skyscrapers, freeways, opera houses. People called it the Paris of South America. But here is the trap that was being set, even as the champagne was flowing. Economists have a name for what happened to Venezuela. They call it Dutch disease. The idea is simple. When a country discovers a massive natural resource, oil, gold, diamonds, it gets so much money from selling that one thing that everything else starts to break down. Because oil money was flooding in, the Venezuelan currency became artificially strong. That made imported goods cheap, which made local farming and manufacturing pointless. Why grow your own food when you can buy it cheaper from abroad? Why build your own factories when imports cost nothing? So Venezuela stopped building, stopped farming, stopped making things. By the mid-20th century, 95% of Venezuela's entire income came from one single product: oil.
The system worked. As long as oil prices stayed high. But it had hollowed out the country's bones. No real industries, no real agriculture, no backup plan. This created two different Venezuelas living in the same country. On one side, a handful of people getting rich off oil contracts and import licenses. On the other side, millions of ordinary people watching the oil rigs pump and struggling to pay rent. A bitterness grew. The oil wealth beneath their feet was going into the pockets of a very few. And out of that anger, out of that bitterness, a man emerged. By the 1980s and 90s, ordinary Venezuelans were furious. They could see the oil rigs pumping money out of the ground. They could see the fancy cars, the gated neighborhoods. But the money was going to the elite, the businessmen, the politicians, the generals. While regular people struggled with inflation, unemployment, and violence. Into this anger stepped Hugo Chavez. He was a military officer, a man who had already tried and failed to take power by force in 1992. He went to jail for 2 years. When he came out, he ran for president the democratic way, and in 1998, he won. His message was simple enough for anyone to understand. The oil belongs to the people, not to American corporations, not to the Venezuelan elite, to you, the worker, the farmer, the poor family living in the hills above Caracas. Now, here is something important to understand. Venezuela had already nationalized its oil back in 1976. The state already owned the oil company called PDVSA. America had not protested back then because the oil was still flowing on America's terms, and Venezuela's policies were not yet a direct challenge to Washington. Chavez changed that. He did not just nationalize oil on paper. He did it in practice. He rewrote the oil laws. He forced foreign oil companies to renegotiate their contracts, and he put the government in full control of PDVSA. This put major American oil firms in direct confrontation with Venezuela. ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips. Their assets were nationalized. They left. With that oil money, Chavez funded what Venezuela had never had before: schools in the hills, clinics in the slums, subsidized food for families who had never been able to afford enough. Poor Venezuelans who had never seen a single dollar from their country's enormous oil wealth suddenly did. His approval ratings soared. Washington hated it. Not because Chavez was helping poor people, America could not say that out loud, but because Chavez was also building relationships with Russia, China, Iran,
and because he was loud about opposing American foreign policy. This was not about oil anymore. This was about influence. Chavez once stood at the United Nations podium the day after President George W. Bush had spoken there. He looked at the podium and said it still smelled like sulfur. He was calling the American president the devil. On the world stage, in 2002, there was a coup attempt against Chavez. For 47 hours, he was removed from power. Then his supporters, mostly from the poor neighborhoods and the military lower ranks, flooded the streets. The coup collapsed. Chavez came back. American intelligence documents later confirmed that the U.S. government had known about the coup in advance. Some suggested it had been encouraged. The relationship between the two countries was now permanently broken. Chavez died of cancer in March 2013. He was 58 years old. Before he died, he named his successor, a former bus driver, a union organizer, his most loyal lieutenant. His name was Nicolás Maduro. And everything was about to get much worse.
Maduro narrowly won the election that followed, and immediately faced a crisis that Chávez's popularity had helped hide. The entire economic model was broken. The social programs were funded entirely by oil revenue. And in 2014, global oil prices crashed from over $100 a barrel to below $30. For Venezuela, this was not just a problem, it was a catastrophe. The country had no backup plan, no manufacturing, no agriculture, no savings, just debt and empty government accounts. Maduro responded badly. Instead of reforming the economy, he tightened his grip on power. He jailed opponents. He stacked the courts with loyalists. He rewrote the Constitution to cut the power of the opposition parliament. America responded with sanctions, crippling ones. These were not symbolic gestures. They targeted Venezuela's ability to sell oil and access the international banking system. The impact was devastating. By 2017, regular Venezuelans were struggling to find basic food. Not luxury food, not imported goods, just food. To deal with the crisis, the government started printing money. Not carefully, not with any plan, just printing. It made everything worse. By 2018, Venezuela's annual inflation rate had reached 1.7 million%. Think about what that actually means. You save money for a whole year to buy a refrigerator. By the time you go to the shop, you cannot afford a loaf of bread with that same money. Venezuela's GDP shrank by 75%. That is not a recession. That is collapse. More than 6 million people left Venezuela, out of a total population of around 30 million. One of the largest displacement crises in the Western Hemisphere since World War II. And through all of this, Maduro stayed. How? Because he gave the military everything. Control of food distribution, control of mining, control of commerce. The generals became the gatekeepers of survival. As long as they were paid, they kept him in power. While the common people were starving, the military and those close to power were looting the country.
and firmly holding Maduro's chair. By 2024, it was becoming clear that Maduro was losing the country. The opposition, led by Maria Corina Machado, was drawing massive crowds. In some surveys, the opposition candidate was leading by 40 points. So, Maduro banned Machado from running, knocked her out of the race entirely. Before the race had even started,
The election happened in July 2024.
the government declared Maduro the winner, but they refused to release the actual voting tallies. Opposition poll workers had collected their own data. Their numbers showed the opposition had won by a landslide. International observers, neighboring governments, the United States, the European Union, all of them said the same thing: show us the evidence. The government never did. Protests exploded across Venezuela. Maduro cracked down. Hundreds were arrested. But this time, something was different. The last piece of legitimacy that Maduro had clung to was gone. The world had stopped pretending. And far away in Washington, someone had been watching all of this very carefully, and he had a plan. Donald Trump came back to the White House in January 2025. On Venezuela, he did not waste time. He talked about Venezuela's oil repeatedly. He used language that nobody in diplomacy would normally use. America is going to take back what belongs to us. Venezuela's oil is being stolen. But you cannot invade a country openly for oil. Not in 2025. The world would not stand for it. So Trump chose a different public justification: drugs. His Justice Department issued indictments against Maduro and senior Venezuelan officials. Drug trafficking charges. A $50 million bounty placed on Maduro's head. Venezuelan criminal networks declared unlawful combatants, which gave legal cover for military action without formally declaring war. Between September and December 2025, the U.S. military launched strikes in the Caribbean, targeting boats suspected of drug trafficking. Over 35 vessels were hit. At least 115 people died. Several of those boats were Venezuelan. In December 2025, an American drone destroyed a Venezuelan dock. America called it a hub for smugglers. Venezuela said civilians had been killed. America was also seizing Venezuelan oil tankers headed for Cuba, cutting off one of the last lifelines Maduro had left. Venezuela could not respond. Its military was outmatched. Its economy was in ruins. Open confrontation would almost certainly have meant the end of his rule. So Maduro chose silence and tried to wait it out. But someone else was not waiting. In August 2025, the CIA began building what intelligence professionals call a pattern of life analysis. A complete picture of one person's entire daily existence. That person was Nicolás Maduro. Agents inside Venezuela began tracking everything. When he woke up, where he slept, which building he was in on which night, who he trusted, what stressed him, what he did when he felt safe. This was not easy. Maduro was paranoid. He changed his sleeping location every single night. He had 6 to 8 different safe houses across Caracas. His personal security had been handed, partly, to Cuban counterintelligence officers. No one in his inner security circle was allowed to carry a personal mobile phone. So the CIA went above the rooftops. Literally. Micro-surveillance drones, too small to appear on most radar systems, were deployed over Caracas. They flew at night, they filmed, they recorded, and then came the breakthrough. The CIA managed to turn someone on the inside, someone close to Maduro, someone he trusted. This person gave the CIA things no drone could ever see: the thickness of the panic room door, the exact times when the security shifts changed, the president's emotional state in the days before the operation. Real time, from inside the compound. Meanwhile, in Kentucky, a full-scale replica of Maduro's compound at Fuerte Tiuna had been constructed. Delta Force teams trained inside it. Hundreds of repetitions. Every door, every hallway, every contingency.
In November 2025, Trump picked up the phone and called Maduro directly. The conversation was blunt. Step down. Leave voluntarily. Accept a negotiated exit, or face the consequences. Maduro's answer was essentially, "Come and get me. I will be right here." He said that publicly, on camera, to the world. Trump gave the operation its final sign-off, Christmas Day, December 25, 2025. The mission had a name: Operation Absolute Resolve. Bad weather and poor visibility in the Caribbean pushed the launch back. The team waited. Then, on the evening of January 2, 2026, the confirmation came through. Maduro was in his restricted compound inside Fuerte Tiuna. The weather had cleared. The window was open. The order was given. Operation Absolute Resolve was activated. And what happened next, you already know.
The world woke up to the news on January 3rd, and the reactions were exactly what you would expect from a world divided. In Miami, Venezuelan exiles danced in the streets. In parts of Caracas, people came outside and cheered. For many people who had suffered for a decade, this felt like relief. But across Latin America, governments reacted with fury. Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, they called it a violation of international law, an act of illegal aggression, imperialism with a new face. The United Nations held an emergency session. Russia and China demanded an immediate condemnation. America vetoed it. The session ended without agreement, as most UN sessions on this kind of issue do. Trump held a press conference. He said America had ended one of the most brutal regimes in the hemisphere. He said the Venezuelan people would now be free. And he announced that American energy companies would assist in rebuilding Venezuela's oil infrastructure. He did not mention what those companies would be paid. Maduro was flown to the United States. He was formally charged with drug trafficking and crimes against humanity.
His wife and several senior officials were also detained. The man who had called himself the true successor of Bolívar was now in an American prison cell, waiting for trial. And what happens to Venezuela now? That is the question nobody has a clean answer to. Removing a dictator does not automatically fix what that dictator broke. The oil infrastructure is damaged. The economy is in ruin. Millions of people are still outside the country. And now, American companies have a major stake in what comes next. Is that liberation? Or is it simply a change of management?
Let me step back for a moment and look at what we just covered. A country that Columbus called paradise, that sat on the largest oil reserves on the planet, that was once the fourth richest nation on Earth, that descended into hunger, collapse, and mass exile, and that was then taken over by foreign soldiers in the middle of the night. That is not a small story. That is 500 years of history compressed into one night. Here is what I keep coming back to. Maduro was a bad leader. That much seems clear. The people of Venezuela were suffering. That is also clear. But does a powerful country have the right to enter another country in the middle of the night without a declaration of war, without a UN resolution, and remove its leader? Even if the leader was corrupt, even if the motive was partly justice, even if the other motive was oil. Because if you look at history, this is not the first time this has happened. Not to Iraq, not to Libya, not to Iran in 1953, not to countless smaller countries that found themselves on the wrong side of American interests. The justification changes. Weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, drugs, democracy. But the resource underneath the ground tends to stay the same. But here is what I believe. Amidst all the geopolitics, all the oil money, all the power plays, there are 30 million people in Venezuela who did not choose any of this, who just want to live, to feed their families, to go home, to build something. Whatever comes next, that question, whether it finally serves those 30 million people, is the only one that actually matters.
Now I want to hear from you. Was this justice? Or was it power wearing justice as a costume? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know what you think. If this video gave you something, a new way of seeing the world, a question you had not thought of before, then subscribe, because we cover stories like this every week. Stories that the mainstream news covers in 2 minutes, but that need an hour to actually understand. We are working hard to maintain a good relationship with our viewers. If you have noticed something that we miss, drop a comment right then. I will see you in the next one. Stay curious.